Hey everyone, we promised in our last video on ASML and IMEX announcement regarding their high NA EUV machine that we would be talking about Lam Research in this video and how Lam Research is going to benefit from ASML's older but still quite new EUV equipment. Let's talk about it. Just like ASML, Lam Research also fits into the wafer fab packaging and assembly equipment part of the industry, the choke point, we like to call it in semiconductor manufacturing.
Yeah, it doesn't matter who you are, TSMC, Intel, Samsung, take your pick of a company that manufactures chips, especially advanced chips. You ultimately have to go through these businesses that provide the actual equipment, and especially the Fab Five: ASML, Applied Materials, Tokyo Electron, KLA Core, and our topic today, Lam Research.
Lam has products for a lot of different processes in the manufacturing process. Lam Research is in the green boxes here in the semiconductor wafer fab equipment market segmentation chart that we have shared from Applied Materials. And those market segmentations are broken down into these specific parts of the process. You see deposition, metrology, and PDC, or measuring stuff, process diagnostic and control, the etch part of the process, cleaning, and then they also provide dicing and packaging equipment.
That's right. In the last video on ASML, of course, ASML fits into the lithography part of that middle cycle. And you can see the arrows, they kind of recycle over and over again. Deposition, etch, and clean are the types of equipment that fit around the piece of lithography equipment from someone like ASML. So the deposition is where some sort of chemical is deposited onto the silicon wafer. The lithography machine with a pattern that blocks out parts of the light is shown onto the wafer. And then different parts of that pattern that reacted with the chemical on the wafer get etched away to create those little microscopic 3D cities that sit on the top of the wafer and that eventually make up the circuitry of chips that power our smartphones, our PCs, data centers, AI, all that good stuff. And then cleaning. And then oftentimes the process gets recycled again multiple times to create smaller and more complex patterns. Now, as you probably know from our past videos on Lam Research, this company is especially stilted historically towards the memory chip part of the industry. So it's in recovery. Memory chip makers like Micron, Samsung, and SK Hynix were hit pretty hard by the downturn the last few years. And so they've been putting off orders for Lam's equipment, but we're starting to come out of that down cycle and we're hopefully at the cusp of a new growth cycle. So this was the guidance that was provided 3 months ago. And you can see the ultimate results came in just above the midpoint.
Lam did do just fine based on their guidance and their actual performance. Revenue came in at nearly 3.9 billion in revenue, up from 3.8 last quarter. And their GAAP earnings per share, you can see, is 778 this quarter. That's actually up 30% year over year.
These are still fairly pedestrian sequential increases from one quarter to the next. This is the guidance for September, the quarter that will end at the end of September of this year. You can see another slight increase to just over 4 billion at the midpoint. But again, just like last quarter, we're expecting another double-digit year-over-year increase in earnings per share. So revenue is still down from the last peak for Lam and the Fab Five was in 2022. We're still slowly inching our way back to that previous peak, but Lam has put some cost controls in place. So its earnings per share continue to rise on a year-over-year basis. So that's the big takeaway here at this particular point for us.
This is a point that came up during the earnings call. Wafer fab equipment spending is expected to be in the $90 billion range for calendar year 2024. They talked a lot about this high bandwidth memory capacity. It is going to continue to ramp up throughout the rest of this year. High bandwidth memory, you may remember from some of our other videos, is crucial to accelerated computing. You may have remember some stacks of memory being placed on circuit boards with GPUs, like in an NVIDIA Blackwell system.
So this is all really good news for Lam if its customers like Micron, Samsung, and SK Hynix continue to scale up their capabilities in HBM, in high bandwidth memory. And again, these are DRAM chips that are getting stacked on top of each other. A lot of progress still needs to be made on this technology. The problem for Lam, though, up to this point, at least for the equipment sales side of the business, is some of their customers. We called out Micron in particular as doing a lot of this. It's been a very, very deep downturn for memory chip makers. And so rather than purchase new equipment to make these DRAM chips for accelerated computing and AI, what they've done is they've asked Lam to help them take some of the older existing equipment in the fab and move it around and repurpose it for HBM. And so up until this point, it's been Lam's services segment, the CSBG, that has helped carry some of the load through this downturn. And management is more hopeful that starting in 2025, calendar year 2025, some of these customers that have been just shuffling around old DRAM equipment and repurposing it for HBM will say, hey, okay, now we need to upgrade equipment. We need new equipment. And Lam will start to make a more robust rebound.
The memory market's return is definitely something that Lam has been closely watching. You can see that historically, Lam's largest segment has been in memory. And these pie charts are reflective of only the revenue segments of actual product sales. It doesn't include the CSBG or the services part of Lam's business. This is from the December quarter. Memory made up 48% of system sales for Lam. And then in March, you can see that decreased to 44%. And then in this most recent quarter, it dropped all the way down to 36% of their system sales.
Now, I guess besides the services group outperforming, it is positive to see the logic and foundry being companies like Taiwan Semi Manufacturing, those have actually increased. So some potential areas for Lam to diversify outside of memory a bit. In addition to the memory market still being very much in a downturn at this particular point, Kasey, there was another thing that you homed in on from the earnings call regarding China, because you also see revenue from China also sort of hit this last quarter.
Yeah, Nick, on the earnings call, one analyst asked about the NAND part of the business, and that is actually where you see NVM. You can see that's 17% of their system revenue segment. The point was made from CFO Douglas Bettinger that Lam Research lost a pretty large NAND customer in the China region, which is hard to replace, but they do expect to see continued solid revenue from China in the coming year, even though there has been some sanctions placed on that segment, especially.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is just a risk inherent with the entire semiconductor industry. China is just a very integral part of the global supply chain. It's just not going to get easily removed from the mix. It's not going to get removed from the mix at all. So some of these export restrictions take a toll on these companies from time to time. And that's probably a big reason for Lam's sell-off post earnings. At any rate, maybe going back to some more of the positive things here, there is still that potential for Lam to greatly diversify its product lineup, including parts of the fab adjacent to ASML in things like extreme ultraviolet lithography and the patterning steps involved with that.
If you haven't already, this would be a good time to watch that video that we had from ASML. IMEC had some great pictures of patterns of a semiconductor. You can see those small etched out lines, and the wafer will need to be filled in with something, and that's usually with copper or possibly with ruthenium from Applied Materials.
Okay, so let's circle back then to the financial part of the equation. So 3 months ago, Lam stock was all the rage because of a 10-for-1 stock split and a $10 billion share repurchase plan to go along with that stock split. Kasey, is this still a reason to be excited? What do you think?
The stock split does not excite me. I don't think I said I was excited when this news came out because the value of the business doesn't change. However, the stock repurchase plan is definitely something to be happy about. Lam Research values their company very highly, and they continue to repurchase stock, which shows that they believe in and have confidence in what's actually happening with the business. So Lam is one of our top stocks this year, and we have continued to add to Lam on the dips. So how do you view our position at this point, Nick?
Yeah, I think for all of our semiconductor insider members, you probably all already know this, but we said if you're excited about a business when it's at some sort of all-time peak and then the stock price dips, even an aggressive dip, pretty rough July and first half of August for Lam Research and a lot of chip stocks, but nothing has really changed. The story remains the same. We're still on course for probably a pretty good 2025 and maybe an even better 2026 after that. And so if you liked the stock where it was at in June, May of this year, and nothing has really changed except for the stock price, I don't see why this isn't still one to continue on a DCA plan or to take a nibble on. Basically, I think we should just maybe call this a valuation reset a little bit for Lam ahead of a significant wave of growth expected next year.
Yeah, I agree. We still really like Lam Research. Make sure you come back for more later this week from us. And do consider checking out our Semiconductor Insider membership. It's only $5 a month, and you get access to our Discord channel where we have exclusive content right after earnings, and much more real-time content from us. Nick's on Discord all the time.
So is Kasey. But
yeah,
you tend to lurk a bit more.
I am. I'm a lurker. It's true. Check it out. Link in the description below. We'll see you again soon at Chipstock Investor.